Let's bring in our guests for this hour. Joining us to discuss, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutors Franz Borghardt and David Bruno, a veritable all-star guest group here. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining me today. And Franz, I'll begin with you. And I want to start right there with Joran van der Sloot. The idea that he sort of decided not to fight this particular charge, the extortion charges and the wire fraud, etc., is surprising to me. Because according to the extradition agreement, the idea was that he was allowed to stay in the United States while this case was pending, and if it went to trial, and even if he appealed. Now, we know that could have taken years. He could have spent years here in the States, but he decided not to do that, which makes me think maybe he will, in fact, come clean with the details of this case. Got to get your thoughts on that.
So the devil is in the plea agreement, right? What is he agreeing to? Which prison is better, a United States federal prison or a Peruvian prison? These are all questions, and the big one for me is, what is relevant conduct? In federal, you can plead guilty to something, but if they attach what's called relevant conduct, it can affect your sentencing. So look, at the end of the day, he's got the time he has to do in the other murder case. He's going to have time in this. I can't imagine it's going to be a light sentence. So maybe he does come clean. Maybe that's the value of the plea is come clean honestly and truthfully, and we're going to give you a resolution that is quote unquote reasonable so that the victims can have closure.
And that's really what this is all about. The prosecutors have promised that from the very beginning, David Bruno, but it doesn't change the facts of his life going forward, because Joran van der Sloot, according to the extradition agreement, will have to go back and finish out his sentence, which I believe goes until 2038 before he comes back to serve any sentence that he faces here. He's facing 40 years on the two charges, 20 each. Your thoughts on what his thought process might be?
Well, first off, I mean, bombshell, Michael. What we just heard from Chanley is that we're going to expect van der Sloot to be on record as part of a factual basis or a question to enter this plea about the details of Natalee Holloway's murder. It's not required. It has nothing to do with the wire fraud charges or extortion that he's going to be pleading to. It's not an element to the offense. It's not a required question to answer as a factual basis of either one of those two charges, but the federal government can require additional type questions or factual basis here, and it looks like this is going to happen. It looks like for the first time we're going to get to know what exactly happened to Natalee Holloway, and I think that's newsworthy right then and there. As far as why he's doing this, well, maybe to come clean, maybe he wants to get away from Peru, but to your point, I mean, he could have dragged this thing out as far as he wanted and as long as he wanted and stayed in the United States, and who knows what that sentence is going to be, or why he does these things. But bombshell, we might hear what happened to Natalee tomorrow.
I'll believe it when I hear it, gentlemen, because this guy, I think it's clear, is a psychopath, and you could say maybe, he decided he wanted to get it off his chest, couldn't sleep at night. I think he sleeps just fine. So I got to wait to see what actually happens in court. Maybe there's some deal being made that we don't know about, but we'll be watching very closely. I want to turn now to the Take Care of Maya trial, Franz, because it was a big day today. The defense has begun their case. They started putting on witnesses who are explaining some of the contradictions in this case. The idea that, in their view, Maya was fine when Mom wasn't around. I mean, one of the witnesses, actually, a couple of the witnesses said very clearly that when Mom was around, there was a very different Maya. She became different things. She'd be using her hands just fine. Mom came around, suddenly she couldn't use her hands. Mom had to help her eat. When Mom was around, there was a lot of pain. When she wasn't, she was fine, sitting in crisscross applesauce, having fun being a regular girl, not even complaining about her accommodations and her treatment. So your thoughts on how they're presenting their case thus far, Franz?
I think the presentation of their case in direct examination was outstanding, right? They're poking holes in the plaintiff's theory. I think they did a fantastic job up until the point where we got to cross-examination and we saw some unnecessary combativeness, Michael. And I don't mind jousting with an attorney, but you generally lose when you do that, and a jury gets frustrated not at the attorney, but they get frustrated at the witness. And I think whatever traction they're gaining with the direct examination, their witnesses need to be mindful that their behavior on cross does affect the defense's case. And look, is it self-serving? Sure, but it's just unnecessary combativeness.
You know, it's interesting, and that's a great point, David, because one of the claims by the plaintiffs in this case, by Maya and her family, is that these folks were actually doctoring things and only taking things down to support the hospital's position. So when you fight back so hard and you're so sort of, you know, recalcitrant to the answers, to the questions, excuse me, being presented by the plaintiff, it only plays into that narrative, because that's the sense I got, especially from the first two witnesses. Third witness, I thought Bonnie Rice did a much better job. She was a registered nurse in a little different position. But at the end of the day, it just plays into a narrative that the plaintiffs have been putting out there.
Yeah, at the end of the day, both sides have things to talk about. And this is what happens at trials. It's like a roller coaster. You have some wins and losses, and some of the days are good, and it goes like hour by hour, Michael. And we see that live. This is us getting a glimpse of really what happens into these courtrooms. And when I think about this case, I think about hindsight's 2020. I mean, we're looking back on decisions that were made day to day back then. And yeah, we're getting a little different frame, a little different perspective from the defense's case. But to your point, I mean, the plaintiff's going to have some things to pick out here from that particular cross-examination about the collusion, and that's really fitting into that theory of the case.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think ultimately, you know, you're right. Civil trials are about wins and losses. They come at a fast pace, and they come for one side and then the other. What you're left with, what I'm left with, is the emotional testimony of Maya. And if that's the case, then I think the hospital might be in trouble. All right, gentlemen, stand by. I do have to take a break.